Imagine being a child, barely old enough to understand the weight of the world, forced to stand in a courtroom under the piercing gaze of a judge. The air is thick with tension, and every word you say could change lives forever. This is the heart-wrenching reality for one little boy who finds himself in an unimaginable situation, testifying against his own mother. But this isn't just any ordinary courtroom drama. What happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice, family, and the lengths a child will go to protect the ones they love. This is a story of courage, cunning, and a shocking twist that no one saw coming. Especially, not the judge. The boy, let's call him Ethan, is only 10 years old. His wide eyes and trembling hands tell a story of innocence caught in a web of adult conflicts. His mother, Sarah, sits at the defendant's table, her face a mask of quiet strength, though her heart is breaking. She's been accused of a crime she swears she didn't commit, and the evidence against her is mounting. The judge, a stern figure with a reputation for being unyielding, has ordered Ethan to take the stand. It's a decision that shocks everyone. In the courtroom, why would a child be put in such a position? What could he possibly say that would determine his mother's fate? As Ethan steps up to the witness stand, the room falls silent. The judge leans forward, his voice cold and commanding. "Tell the court what you know," he says, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. Ethan looks at his mother, her eyes filled with tears, and then back at the judge. For a moment it seems like he might break down, but then something shifts. His small frame straightens, and his voice, though soft, carries a surprising determination. What he says next stuns everyone, including the judge. But let's rewind for a moment. How did it come to this? Sarah was a single mother working tirelessly to provide for Ethan. She had no history of trouble, no reason to be caught up in a legal nightmare. Yet here she was, fighting for her freedom and her son's future. The prosecution painted her as a mastermind, someone who had manipulated those around her for personal gain. But Ethan knew better. He knew his mother was kind, selfless, and would never hurt anyone. So why was he being forced to testify against her? And why did it feel like the judge had a personal vendetta against his family? As Ethan begins to speak, his words are careful, measured. He recounts the events as he remembers them, but there's something unusual about his testimony. It's almost as if he's leading the court somewhere, guiding them to a truth they hadn't considered. The judge listens intently, his expression growing more and more perplexed. And then, just when it seems like Ethan is about to reveal something crucial, he stops. He looks directly at the judge and says something so unexpected, so bold, that the entire courtroom gasps. The tension is palpable. What could a 10-year-old possibly say to turn the tables in such a high-stakes situation? The judge, visibly shaken, leans back in his chair. For the first time, his confidence wavers. He had expected Ethan to crumble under pressure, to say something that would seal Sarah's fate. But instead, the boy has done something extraordinary. He's not just defending his mother. He's exposing a truth that could change everything. The courtroom is in chaos, the prosecution scrambling to regain control, and Sarah's lawyer sensing an opportunity to turn the tide. But the judge isn't ready to let go of his authority. He bangs his gavel, silencing the room, and fixes Ethan with a steely gaze. "Explain yourself," he demands, his voice low and dangerous. Ethan takes a deep breath. This is the moment he's been waiting for, the moment he's been preparing for in his young mind. He knows what he's about to say could either save his mother or make things worse, but he also knows he has no choice. The truth is too important to hide. As he begins to speak again, the room hangs on his every word. What he reveals next is a bombshell, a twist so shocking that even the judge is left speechless. But before Ethan can finish, the judge interrupts, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Enough!" he shouts, slamming his gavel down once. More. The tension is unbearable. What will happen next? Will the judge listen to Ethan, or will he silence the boy to protect his own agenda? This is where we leave you, on the edge of your seat, wondering how this incredible story will unfold. A child's courage, a mother's love, and a judge's hidden motives all collide in a courtroom drama that will keep you guessing until the very end. What will Ethan do next? Will justice prevail? Or will the system fail an innocent family? Stay tuned for the next part of this gripping tale, where the stakes are higher than ever, and the truth is more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The courtroom was a pressure cooker of emotions, and Ethan's small voice cut through the silence like a knife. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, but before he could finish, the judge's gavel came down like a thunderclap. "Enough!" the judge barked, his face flushed with a mix of anger and something else, something that almost looked like fear. The room erupted into murmurs, the tension so thick it felt like the walls themselves were leaning in to hear what would happen next. But the judge wasn't done. He turned to the bailiff and ordered, "Clear the courtroom, now." As the spectators were ushered out, Ethan remained seated in the witness stand, his little hands gripping the edge of the wooden rail. His mother, Sarah, shot him a look of desperation, her eyes pleading with him to stay strong. She wanted to scream, to tell him it was okay, that he didn't have to do this. But she couldn't. The rules of the courtroom bound her as tightly as the accusations that had landed her here. The prosecution team exchanged uneasy glances, clearly thrown off by Ethan's unexpected turn. They had been so confident, so sure of their case. But now, something was shifting, and they didn't like it one bit. Once the room was cleared, the judge leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "Young man," he began, his tone icy, "do you understand the gravity of what you're doing? This is not a game. You are under oath, and lying in a court of law has serious consequences." Ethan nodded, his face pale but determined. "I'm not lying," he said softly, his voice trembling but clear. I just want to tell the truth." The judge studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he gestured for Ethan to continue. "Very well," he said, "but choose your words carefully." Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew this was his only chance. He had to make them understand. He had to make them understand. "It started a few months ago," Ethan began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Mom was working late a lot, and I stayed with Mrs. Jenkins next door. She's nice, but she's not my mom." He paused, his eyes flickering to Sarah, who was now crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. "One night, I heard Mom come home really late. She sounded upset, so I went to see if she was okay. That's when I saw him." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Saw who?" the judge pressed, his impatience barely concealed. Ethan hesitated, his small hands fidgeting. "The man," he said finally. "The man who came to our house that night." Sarah's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Ethan," she said gently, "can you tell us more about this man? Did you recognize him?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but he was wearing a suit like the ones you wear," he said, pointing to Claire. "He had a briefcase and he looked important. Mom didn't want to let him in, but he said he had to talk to her. They went into the kitchen and I stayed in the hallway. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Enough for what?" he asked, his voice like steel. Ethan looked down at his hands, his next words barely audible. Enough to know he was threatening her. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sarah's lawyer exchanged a quick glance with her, a flicker of hope in her eyes. This was new information that hadn't come up during the trial. The prosecution team shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly caught off guard. "Threatening her how?" Claire pressed, her voice calm but urgent. Ethan swallowed hard. He said if she didn't do what he wanted, bad things would happen. To her, to me. His voice broke on the last word, and Sarah let out a choked sob. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And what did your mother do?" he asked, his tone softer now, almost reluctant. Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "She said no," he said, firmly. She told him to leave, and she said she wouldn't let him hurt us, but he just laughed. He said she didn't have a choice. The room was silent, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. Claire seized the moment. "Your Honor," she said, rising to her feet, "this changes everything. If my client was being coerced or threatened, it directly impacts the charges against her. We need to investigate this further." The judge held up a hand, silencing her. "Not so fast," he said, his eyes still fixed on Ethan. "Young man, why didn't you say anything about this before?" Ethan hesitated, his small frame trembling. "I was scared," he admitted. "The man said if I told anyone something bad would happen, and then Mom got arrested and I didn't know what to do. But I can't let her go to jail for something she didn't do. I just can't." His voice broke and he wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. The judge studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then with a sigh, he turned to the prosecution. "Counselors," he said, "we need to adjourn for the day. There are matters that require further investigation." The lead prosecutor, a tall man with a sharp jawline, looked like he wanted to argue, but he simply nodded. "Of course, Your Honor," he said, though his tone was tight with frustration. As the bailiff approached to escort Ethan from the stand, the boy looked at the judge one last time. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "please don't let them take my mom away." The judge didn't respond, but for a brief moment his stern facade seemed to crack, revealing something softer beneath. Then, with a wave of his hand, he dismissed everyone from the courtroom. Sarah was led away, her eyes locked on Ethan until the doors closed behind her. Claire lingered for a moment, her mind racing. She had a lot of work to do and not much time to do it. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the steps. Ethan sat on a bench, his legs swinging nervously as he waited for Claire to finish speaking with a colleague. He felt exhausted, like he'd just run a marathon, but he also felt a strange sense of relief. He'd done it. He'd told the truth. But as he replayed the judge's reaction in his mind, a knot of worry formed in his stomach. Would it be enough? Would anyone believe him? And what about the man in the suit? He was still out there somewhere, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Claire approached, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "Ethan," she said, crouching down to his level, "you were very brave in there, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about that man. Anything at all. Can you do that?" Ethan nodded, though his heart was pounding. He didn't want to think about that night, but he knew he had to. For his mom, for their future. As Claire pulled out a notebook and pen, Ethan took a deep breath and began to speak. The story was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. But one thing was certain, Ethan wasn't going to back down, not now, not ever.